Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining our webinar. My name is Micah Whitfield. I work with Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies Coalition of Georgia, where we work to improve maternal and infant health through education, advocacy, and access to vital resources. This webinar, how childcare programs can support breastfeeding, best practices and policies. We're very excited about it. We have some great speakers. And we just want to thank all our co-hosts and our partners. I want to thank the Georgia Perinatal Association for co-hosting this event with us, as well as the EPIC program, which is a part of the Georgia chapter of American Academy of Pediatrics. We want to thank Bright from the Start for their support for this, as well as GEARS, the Georgia Early Education Program. So thank you all so much for partnering with us to make this happen. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speakers. So we have two speakers today, Arlene Toole and Claire Eden. Arlene is an IBCLC, and she works with the EPIC, Educating Physicians in Their Communities Breastfeeding Program, where she's a director there with the Georgia chapter of American Academy of Pediatrics. At the AAP, she promotes and coordinates physician education in doctors' offices, hospitals, and residency programs. She's been an international board-certified lactation consultant since 1993. She has 25 years of experience on speaking as a speaker on many topics of breastfeeding, and she has 3 children and 5 grandchildren, with another one due, I think, this week. So thank you very much, Arlene, for joining us with so much exciting things happening in your life. But she loves to cook, swim, hike, and kayak. And Claire began supporting breastfeeding families in 1998 through the Leche League and has been a board-certified lactation consultant as well since 2009. Before becoming a lactation consultant, she worked in the Mental Health Administration. And prior to joining the Children's Healthcare of Atlanta, she worked at the Georgia chapter of American Academy of Pediatrics. There she coordinated the Breastfeeding Coalition and worked as a lactation consultant at a pediatric practice and a private practice. She currently serves on the board of the Georgia Breastfeeding Coalition and on the board of the Southeast Lactation Consultant Association, SELCA. Claire joined CHOA in 2014, and she's the full-time lactation consultant at the Eggleston Hospital for Children. She's a proud mother of 3 daughters, and her family has lived in Atlanta for over 18 years. So we have a wealth of experience. We, Healthy Mothers, Healthy Babies, we offer a wide range of topics related to maternal and infant health in Georgia. So you can visit our website for additional information about that. I will also ask everyone to complete an evaluation after the webinar. So the email you use to register, I'll send you a link with the evaluation. And if you are in need of CERPs, I will send you the post-test link for that. So please let me know. So we will go ahead and get started. Pass it over to our presenters.
Today, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you for the introduction, Claire, and I'm looking forward to this today. And I'll be starting the talk, and I hear that we have quite a few people from our child care centers in Georgia. I'm glad to have y'all on this. I hope this gives you a little insight to why we think human milk is good for human babies. So if you have any questions, I think we'll have a few minutes at the end to talk about them. We'll be going over why breast milk is important and talk a little bit about moms establishing a milk supply and sometimes why it's challenging for some, especially when they're going back to work. A little bit about employer buy-in, because moms are going back to work. Some places that they work are not very receptive to her pumping there. And then Claire was going to end with talking more about the child care centers, how you're supporting breastfeeding, some more resources for you all, and maybe more questions at the end as well. So thank you very much. Well, my slide is not advancing. Micah, can you see? Can you see if it's not? It was advancing a while ago.
Let's try one more time.
It did one.
Okay, try it again. Let's see. I can see the mouse moving.
I'm trying to start different areas.
Okay.
Okay, well, that works. What does the Academy of Pediatrics say about breastfeeding? One thing, the AP, which is the American Academy of Pediatrics, they talk about how breast milk is the best milk for almost every baby, and they encourage moms to exclusively breastfeed for about 6 months. Babies are all different. They're not all going to start on the first day of 6 months, but some will usually start wanting solids when they're sitting up, reaching for foods around between 5 and 7 months. So that's a good guideline. And they also encourage moms to breastfeed for 1 year or longer. They also want moms to have family and community support, because really it does take a village to help moms to continue to breastfeed. And breastfeeding should be perceived as the biological norm of infant feeding, mainly because breast milk is species specific. If you know a little bit about breast milk, it actually changes from a beginning of a feeding for a baby to the end. There's actually more fat at the end of the feeding than it is at the beginning. So if a baby's just thirsty, they may nurse only for a couple of minutes and not be very hungry, just kind of getting a lot of formula. Breast milk also changes between 1 and 6 months, and 1 month and a year, and actually daily. So it changes as the baby is growing too. Well, let me see. Okay. Other experts talk about breastfeeding too. The World Health Organization recommends breastfeeding for 2 years. The American Society of OBGYNs, they also have a great toolkit for their physicians that help moms to help physicians to learn a little bit how they can support and encourage moms to breastfeed when they see them. The Healthy People 2000 goals, they want moms to, 82% of the moms to initiate breastfeeding, and 61% to still be breastfeeding at 6 months. The CDC is where we get a lot of our breastfeeding data for the United States especially, and they have lots of resources. If you need some resources about breastfeeding for anything, you can usually pull it up off there. We're going to be using their handling storage techniques today too. But they have what they call the breastfeeding report card. For every couple of years, they pull reports across the United States and find out how many moms are breastfeeding, how many start, how many continue breastfeeding. And in Georgia, for a couple of years ago, which haven't done it this year actually, it's not out yet. So 2 years ago, it was 69% of moms were ever breastfed their babies, 48 breastfed for about 6 months, and then 29% of those breastfed for actually a year. There is also something from the CDC called MPINC. It's the Maternity Practice and Infant Nutrition and Care, where they actually evaluate hospitals on their breastfeeding practices in support of their moms. This comes out every 2 years. This year, last year actually, they decided not to do it again. They're reevaluating and asking new questions, but it should be out very soon for probably 2019, where they go into hospitals and ask them about, how well they're doing with breastfeeding. So you can look up Georgia's report on that website as well. Georgia also supported breastfeeding is by the Surgeon General's call to action, where they want community support, lactation support, and encourage lactation support in hospitals where babies are being seen every day. And benefits to the mom, there's decreased postpartum bleeding after the mom has the baby, better weight loss for the mother because she's burning extra calories. There's actually a reduced risk of cardiovascular disease and even certain cancers like premenopausal breast cancer, ovarian cancer, endometrial cancer. And of course, breastfeeding saves money. Moms are not having to purchase any infant formula and maybe even the things that go along with it. Although if they're going back to work, they're buying bottles, but they may not need as many as if they were exclusively formula feeding. And actually, it does save time. A lot of people don't want to breastfeed. They think it takes more time, but there's been a great study that was done a couple of years back that found that, yes, breastfeeding takes more time for about the first 6 weeks of life, but after that, that really saves the mother time because she's not preparing formula. She's not going to go to the store and to buy formula. So in the end, she saves a lot of time, and a lot of moms will like it so they don't have to get up at night, go fix a bottle. And some of my friends said, I think I breastfed because I was just lazy. So what's the benefits for the child care centers? I think a lot of parents are attracted to child care centers that they found out that are supporting breastfeeding. I know that happened in my family because my daughter-in-law, when she started back to work, the child care center near her house was very supportive of breastfeeding, went over there handling the storage of the milk and everything, so she was very pleased about that. Breastfed babies tend to be sick less often, they spit up less, and actually it should save staff time when mothers visit to breastfeed, and some do actually go to breastfeed their babies at their lunch break if they have a day of the child care near their house. What about employers? When moms are going back to work, it's important for them to actually visit or talk to their employer before they return back to work, because I think employees don't know a lot about breastfeeding. Most of them don't anyway. So they need to know the benefits for them. We know there's less employee turnover if the moms know that her employees are supportive of breastfeeding. There's also a faster return from maternity leave, mainly because some employers will actually have a flexible schedules when she returns. There's less absenteeism, mainly because when she does return to work, if her baby's sick less often, then she is not going to miss as many days of work. Mothers are more appreciative of their employees' support, and they have more of a positive employee relationship. And in the end, it really saves employers money. I think this is important to all businesses because they're always worried about the ROI or return on investment for whatever they give their employees. And when they researched and found that if putting in a small lactation room for mothers actually saves them money and healthcare costs, they're very willing to do it. And they found it wasn't that difficult. Many of the little lactation rooms are small, maybe old small closets that weren't even used, changed into a little room for moms to go pump, but didn't cost them that much, but yet the babies were tended to be healthier. One study was done quite a few years back. For every 1,000 babies not breastfed, there was an extra over 2,000 doctor visits, 609 prescriptions were written, and 212 hospitalization days too. And why is it important to support mothers that are working? Because they are working. 70% of employed mothers with children younger than 1 year old work full time. 1/3 of these mothers return to work within 3 months after birth, and 2/3 return within 6 months. And we know that moms are one of the fastest growing segments of the labor force. And in 2012, 57% of all mothers with infants were employed. And working, we also know that when moms are working outside the home, it reduces breastfeeding duration. In fact, working in a hospital for years, the biggest barrier I used to hear from my moms was, I don't think I'm going to breastfeed because I do have to go back to work. I think a lot of moms don't realize there is an option that you can breastfeed until you go back to work, or you can actually continue to work by pumping when you go back to work. Some mothers actually may use formula during the day when their baby's at child care, and they may breastfeed in the morning and evening. So there's lots of options and choices for mothers, and that's what I think we need to get the word out to moms about that. And we also, through studies, do know that mothers intended to work full-time are much less likely to start breastfeeding, and they do stop earlier. So this is why we want to make sure that the child care centers are very supportive of our mothers. Breastfeeding initiation and duration are higher when we know when employed women, they have longer maternity leaves, and this we know is not all possible. We know I used to have moms that were going back to work at 6 weeks, and it's very, very difficult if you're going back to work that early. If they have access to breastfeeding support programs, luckily we're seeing more and more of those nowadays, that moms can have another mother-to-mother support. Even some large companies actually have a breastfeeding support group for mothers. Prenatal, I know the CDC has one great one. Prenatally, they talk about how to return to work. Having flexible work hours is great, and even breastfeeding during their work break too. Some moms choose to come during their lunchtime. The little baby in this picture, her name was Kennedy. Her mom works with me, and her mom was exclusive breastfeeding Kennedy, and then about 8 months of age, Kennedy cold turkey said she didn't want to breastfeed anymore. So her mom ended up pumping until Kennedy was a year. And our mother felt like the reason Kennedy stopped was because Kennedy loved the bottle. It was easy. The milk came out fast. It was easy. And she just didn't want to breastfeed any longer. So when she had her second son, our second child, she had a little boy, and she returned to work, she decided to choose a child care center real near her work. So at lunchtime, she would leave our work, go breastfeed her little boy, and then come back during her break time. And this really, she felt like, made breastfeeding more successful with this second child. So this is something to think about when moms are looking at child care centers, maybe choosing a child care center that's more close to the work than it is their home. And you know, sometimes mothers work and home, the distance between work and home can be tremendous. But supportive child care centers should encourage mom to visit. They should have a breastfeeding policy and guidelines. Hopefully the staff will be knowledgeable and at least supportive of the mom's choice to breastfeed, and they provide a place for mothers to breastfeed or pump. And it doesn't take a big space either. Just one of the mothers I talked to recently who had gone back to work, she said that she breastfeeds and they have a little break room, and she said actually they just had a little screen. She said I just kind of turn my back to everybody and behind this little screen and breastfeed my baby, and people will come in and out and eat. She said, but at least I felt like they were very supportive and trying to help me return to work. In Georgia, we have the Department of Early Care and Learning, DECAL. They have the rules and regulations about breastfeeding, and you can actually pull these up. We will actually add these to our resources when we send them out too. But they do have require that the child care centers have an area to breastfeed. Their bottles are labeled. They even have guidelines for formula-fed children as well. Make sure that refrigerator temperature is monitored. This is very important. Make sure the mom's milk stays cool. Thawing instructions if mothers that are actually bringing in some frozen breast milk, and the disposal of leftover milk after feedings. One of the things I've heard in the past, and I don't think it's as common nowadays, was some of the child care centers required a certain amount of milk in a bottle, but breastfed babies do tend to eat smaller amounts more frequently during the day, and I encourage moms to bring smaller amounts of milk in their bottles, because if they have a 5-ounce bottle and the baby takes 2 ounces, you know you have to throw that milk out within a couple hours. So you want to make sure she's bringing in appropriate amounts for each feeding. In the beginning, it's very important, whether mom goes back to work or not, she's got to establish her milk supply, because babies, their milk supply work on the supply and demand. The more milk is removed from the breast, the more milk mom will make. This is why mothers of twins are going to make double the amount of milk. They got 2 babies actually removing twice as much milk, telling her body to make twice as much for them. Babies do breastfeed a lot in the beginning, usually 8 to 12 times in 24 hours. This doesn't last forever, but it does last for the first, sometimes 1 to 6 weeks, maybe even longer or less, depending on the baby, but very frequently in the beginning until their milk is well established. Engorgement is something that happens to some mothers when they are not breastfeeding frequently enough. The breasts get full of milk, and what happens when that happens, the body tells itself, don't make any more milk. The baby's not eating, so stop making milk. So if the mother is getting full and engorged, she needs to make sure she's pumping or feeding the baby regularly to keep the milk flowing. Milk removal is very important. Like I said, in the mom's diet, when I worked in the hospital, it was funny because a lot of the healthcare workers that were working with moms say, oh, I'm telling the mom she's not making enough milk. She needs to eat more fruit or eat more anything. They would come up with just their own little ideas of what mothers should eat, or drink milk. Oh, you know, she doesn't really drink a lot of milk. I think she needs to drink more milk, or she doesn't drink enough water. But actually, the mother's diet has a very little effect on how much milk she makes. What we really need to focus on is the mom breastfeeding enough. Mothers returning back to work, again, if they are pumping twice at work, and normally if they were home with the baby, they're breastfeeding 4 times, she may see a decrease in her milk supply. So we need to encourage her to be pumping at work about as frequently as she was breastfeeding at her house or at home. Oops. Sorry about that. I did put this slide in just briefly because mothers nowadays use a pump, some good pumps when they come back to work. There's lots of pumps out there. There's hand pumps, there's battery pumps. We have piston electric pumps, hospital-grade pumps, and double and single pumps. Most moms, if they're going back to work full-time, will need a really good electric pump. These are sometimes supplied by their insurance companies. So through the ACA now, mothers with insurance should be getting their breast pumps provided to them. Unfortunately, not all insurance companies are created the same, but a good breast pump is very important. Hand pumps are great for the moms who's maybe working 1 day a week, or she's just pumping occasionally, but a little more difficult if she's pumping frequently during the day while her baby is at childcare. And when mom's at home, the first thing they think about, oh, I've got to go back to work at 6 weeks or 8 weeks, so I need to give the baby a bottle. Well, they really need to focus on first getting their milk supply established. They need to, when they're going to introduce the bottle, and usually the milk supply being established takes about 6 weeks on average. After that, then the fathers can maybe give the baby a bottle, you know, and grandma always wants to get involved too. They can offer that first bottle to the baby. They don't have to do it at 4 or 5 feedings a day. They can do it once every couple of days until she goes back to work. Just have somebody else to give the baby that breast milk. And it doesn't even have to be a lot. Maybe put an ounce of breast milk in the bottle just so that they get used to taking the bottle nipple before they return to work. And also pace the bottle feedings. When babies learn to breastfeed, they have a great suck, and some bottles are not, or nipples are not conducive for a breastfed baby. They might have a nipple that has too fast of a flow. So if you're working with a breastfeeding baby and he's spitting up a lot or seems to get choked a lot, you might want to recommend the mother check her nipple size on her bottles and change them to a slower flow nipple, because that could help the baby to actually slow down. And we do what we call the pace of feeding, so the baby sucks a couple of times. You kind of pull the nipple out of the baby's mouth and then put it back in there so that they can actually not get choked and eat too fast. When moms are storing milk at home, they need to make sure they're cleaning and sterilizing their equipment every day. They need to have use plastic bottles that are made for breast milk, and there's plastic bags made for breast milk. You would not want to put them in the freezer Ziploc bag or any kind of Ziploc bags, because they do burst more often, especially if that milk is frozen. So that's very important. You can use glass containers. I don't think many moms are using those as much anymore. They are good, but most moms choose plastic containers. Make sure too, when the mom's bringing in her milk, that if she has a bottle, that it is not only labeled correctly, it has a tight fitting lid or cap. And in the end too, moms really need to know how to hand express. There's always a case where mom forgets her breast pump when she's gone back to work. I had a mother one time, she used to take Marta to work, and she called me, she said, I left my breast pump on the Marta and on the train today. And she was getting engorged, and so I had to really talk her really through how to hand express, because she had no access to a breast pump at that time and couldn't go get hers at that time. So every mom needs to know so that she doesn't get engorged and have lots more problems down the road. So it's great to have that knowledge in an emergency. This is where Claire starts. She will be talking a little bit more about the daycare centers and returning to work.
Hi, everyone. I hope you found this useful so far. I'm going to pick up kind of in a timeline at mothers, returning to work or school. When looking for a child care center, look for one that, and if you work in a child care center, be a child care center that parents are welcome to visit, and that policies published and everyone understands. We kind of would recommend to parents as best practice that the parents prepare the feedings, the bottles all measured and ready for the next day, and have everything packed and ready. When I'm coaching moms for back to work plan, things that get everyone in a routine are always a good idea. Doing a trial run where you kind of walk through where you're keeping everything at home, so that when you get there, you don't find that you've forgotten something. And then a kind of unusual twist that may be useful to some of you when you're scheduling when a baby starts at your child care center is recommending that mom start back to work in the middle or the end of the week rather than on a Monday if she works a regular Monday through Friday type of job. That can make that kind of re-entry into the work life a little easier on families when they only do that routine for 2 or 3 days and then have a weekend rather than starting on a Monday. That first week can be really rough on everybody when you start back and do 5 days in a row.
Sometimes it's
Just having trouble advancing the slide. There we go. So rather than relying on a very large freezer stash or worrying or stressing about making a big stash of frozen milk at home, best practice is for mothers to be able to rely on milk they express during the week for feeding their baby during that week. So Monday's milk that she expresses at work, if she works a standard work schedule, would be used for Tuesday, Tuesday for Wednesday, Wednesday for Thursday, rather than stressing about building up a lot of a freezer stash. So for most mothers who are planning to pump when they're at work or at school, then fresh milk is the way to go, and then only rely on their freezer stash in a pinch. Or some people rotate and put Friday's milk in the freezer and Monday use the oldest frozen milk thawed and prepared for the next day. Talking through breast milk, whoops, I think I skipped a slide. Storage guides. You'll find there's a lot of different published resources on milk storage. This is from the CDC. Actually, this is from the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine Clinical Protocol. Most of them are similar to this. Around 4 hours and 4 days, or 5 hours and 5 days are a good guideline when you're talking about at room temperature and in the refrigerator. So depending on which source you use, you can consider that freshly expressed milk, when a mother expresses it, is good at room temperature for up to 4 or 5 hours and is good in the refrigerator for up to 4 or 5 days. So most milk that she expresses can be used right away that week to feed her baby without freezing and thawing. If she's relying on some frozen milk, then once it's thawed, it's good at room temperature for an hour or two and up to 24 hours in the refrigerator. This published schematic here talks about what is considered room temperature, what's considered refrigerator, and freezers. So a question that comes up a lot is how long is milk good for in the freezer? And there's really not a time that it becomes bad, but we do recommend that mothers rotate their frozen milk so they don't have milk that's getting 6 or 12 months old in the freezer. Use their oldest frozen milk whenever they thaw milk to feed the baby. And then something that everyone should keep in mind is that thawed frozen milk should not ever be refrozen. If a baby doesn't finish a feeding from a bottle, then you want to use that milk within an hour or two or discard it. It shouldn't be saved for later in the day. Keeping in mind that breast milk can have special handling instructions, so keep it refrigerated until you feed it. Wash your hands before you prepare any food for children in your care. Milk of any type should not be microwaved for babies or children. It should be warmed, if it's going to be warmed, safely in some warm water rather than and put in the microwave or on the stove top. Do you want to just forward this one?
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Using clean conditions is really important. And then breast milk. So human milk looks different than cow's milk, which is to be expected. All different mammalian milks look different depending on what the kind of macronutrients, the relationship of fat, proteins, and sugars in the milk. And human milk is going to look different from mother to mother. It sometimes may look watery to someone who's not used to handling human milk. Or it may look too thick. Sometimes people say that it looks like it's too creamy, or it may look different than you expect. And a mother's milk can be different kind of colors in terms of, like, it's generally white, but it may have an orangish tint or a greenish tint or a bluish tint, and that's all within normal range, and it may be affected by the mother's diet or medications or anything like that, and it's all good. The other thing that can be new to people who aren't used to handling human milk is that it's not pasteurized like cow's milk that you buy in the store, and it's not homogenized, which means the fat will settle up to the top. So if milk has been prepared the night before in a bottle and brought in to a child care center, it should be swirled or gently shaken to integrate the fat into the milk if it's risen up to the top. And breast milk can have a smell to it that isn't like cow's milk too, and that can be affected by mom's diet or the enzymes in her milk. So that's all to be expected and all okay. And then keeping in mind too that mother's milk and formula and other foods can be all stored together in one refrigerator. It's not an occupational hazard or exposure, and it can be stored with other food. It is food for the baby. And formula and breast milk can be stored together in a refrigerator for children in your child care center. It is recommended that parents, as best practice, prepare the feeds in advance, but if there is a situation where the child care worker is thawing frozen breast milk, overnight in the refrigerator is the safest way to thaw human milk that's been frozen, but it can also be thawed more quickly by placing it under warm running water or in a bowl, or like a coffee mug works really well of warm water. Some child care centers use a crock pot, but in that situation, the container should be put in a Ziploc bag so that it's not, the outside of the bottles are not contaminating each other. When you're reintegrating the fat in thawed milk, it should be swirled or kind of rotated gently, not shaken really hard. And of course, we mentioned you don't use a microwave to thaw or heat bottles of any kind, whether it's breast milk or formula, due to hot spots. And you don't want to overheat human milk in order to preserve all the wonderful live cells that are in the milk. The nutrition is generally going to be preserved if it was overheated in terms of the macronutrients of fat, protein, and sugars. But there's human milk is synthesized from a mother's blood, and it's full of live living cells, working cells, and overheating can damage some of that and some of the immunological properties of human milk. And like I mentioned, you don't refreeze thawed breast milk. And once you thaw it, it's good for about 24 hours in the refrigerator. So when you're feeding a baby in a child care setting, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more specifically in a few more slides, but babies should be held to be fed, and the bottle should be paced. In fact, this picture kind of implies something different than how I would recommend that a breastfed baby, or really any baby, is bottle fed, which is not on their back and not with the bottle in a sort of chug-a-lug position, as I call it, or frat party funneling position where they're laying on their back and the milk is coming really quickly. Sometimes a baby will start swallowing very audibly in that position, and we think that that means the baby's very hungry, but it can often mean that the milk is flowing too quickly for the baby's comfort, and it can increase the risk of choking or aspiration of breast milk.
Claire, I think we lost you. Can someone post in the comments or either shoot it through questions if you can still hear anything other than from me? Okay, so you can hear me. Not sure if they lost signal. Give me just a second. Sorry for the inconvenience.
Hey, it's Claire. Sorry, we had an audio problem. Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes. Okay, yes, you're back.
All right, were we on this feeding baby slide when you stopped hearing me? Okay, good. Sorry, the phone got disconnected. Okay, so babies should be fed on cue rather than on a rigid schedule. And when you're holding a baby to feed them, the feeding should be paced, and the baby's cues should be followed, and the milk should not be flowing too quickly. I know Arlene talked about bottle nipples. We want the feeding to be relaxed and safe and comfortable, everything about feeding. In order to promote best feeding practices and reduce obesity, babies should be fed on cue and not forced to finish bottles, and not fed in a way that feeding goes too quickly for them. And then having a way to record and communicate with parents about how much their baby needs and how much their baby is taking at each feeding, so that you all can be in communication about a best and agreed upon and written feeding plan for each baby. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So breastfed babies need to be held and observed for cues for satiety. They may prefer their milk to be warmed, using a slow flow nipple and pacing the feeding. If you're struggling with a baby taking a bottle in your child care center, using some different positions rather than a standard baby feeding position that we sort of have in mind since childhood, where you're cradling them, can help a baby accept a bottle. Sometimes putting the baby outward facing helps. Sometimes mother sending in something that smells like her for a young baby can help. And then older babies that are not accepting a bottle well may do well with a sippy cup or a little straw cup. One of those silicone straw cups can work well. So there can be some different options besides a sort of standard baby feeding position that we all sort of assume since we're children feeding our doll babies. So it's a good option, good idea to offer some resources to parents about helping their baby accept a bottle. So when parents are sending milk into a child care center, it's important to not put more milk than the baby's expected to be fed. And then plan in terms of volume for about 1 ounce in an hour for a young baby. So if a baby will be at the child care center for 8 or 9 hours, then 4 2-ounce feedings or 3 3-ounce feedings is going to be in about the right range for younger babies. And then it's often encouraged, especially if a baby's going through a growth spurt, or if a parent may be late to pick up on occasion, to send a smaller 1 or maybe 2-ounce bottle for an older baby, or 1 ounce for a younger baby. That's sort of a snack to hold off a baby who might be getting hungry when it's close to the time that the parents come to pick him or her up, so that the baby is still interested in breastfeeding when he's back with mother. Milk sent into a child care center should be labeled, and that policy should be all very clearly communicated in terms of how the milk should be labeled. And then milk should be brought in cold to the child care center. So there's a lot of ways that child care workers can offer support to breastfeeding mothers. I hear a lot from mothers that sometimes it's implied, or they've received kind of implied communication from their child's caregivers that their baby's difficult to care for because he or she is a breastfed baby. And I think trying to encourage parents that breastfeeding is still the right thing and best choice for their baby, even when they're back at work, goes a really long way, because they've chosen you to put their child in the care of, and that's a great trust. So they really do pick up on the kind of attitude that's conveyed about how their baby is being cared for. And it helps parents feel at ease when they know that their baby is loved and appreciated and isn't considered a nuisance at the child care. So praising them for continuing to send in milk, providing a place for mothers to breastfeed or express milk at the child care can really make a big difference in making her life easier. Having a written feeding plan and communicating that every day to a parent so they know how to appropriately feed at home. And then keeping in communication about when to increase or decrease as their baby gets older, the amount of milk that's required during the day. Some particularly supportive childcare centers will keep some a container of frozen milk or a bottle ready to be thawed and warmed for a baby who, if there's an emergency or the baby specifically needs more milk in a day. So, childcare centers supporting moms back to work. I love this New Yorker cover because it shows that, you know, all sorts of moms and all sorts of jobs are breastfeeding their babies. So having a place for mothers to breastfeed in your center can really make a big difference. And as Arlene mentioned, doesn't have to be fancy. Ideally, it's private or screened from view, and that it has a place for mothers to wash their hands, a comfortable chair, which isn't necessarily going to be a rocking chair. If it's mainly going to be used for expressing milk, then a more upright chair is generally preferred. Having an outlet for mothers who are using an electric breast pump. And there's all sorts of ways to be creative about that. The Office of Women's Health website at the federal government website has amazing resources on how to accommodate pumping mothers. And if your child care center employs women who are having children, then this is a win-win for employees and for your customers. So being a cheerleader to moms, as I mentioned, really listening and being very communicative so that they know that you like caring for their breastfed baby, and being patient with all the mothers of your babies, because going back to work is really hard work, whether you're breastfeeding or bottle feeding or formula feeding. It's a challenge in those early days, and mothers need a lot of support and information. So to kind of wrap up, I wanted to review a really wonderful resource that's available through the Carolina Global Breastfeeding Institute. It's the 10 Steps to a Breastfeeding-Friendly Child Care Facility, and it's available on their website. It's based on the 10 steps to a baby-friendly hospital, which many of you may be familiar with because we now have 13 hospitals in Georgia that are certified as baby-friendly. And what that means is that it's not so much about promoting breastfeeding, it's about not getting in the way of breastfeeding. So it's about making sure that as a hospital or as a child care facility, that your policies are not impeding women from breastfeeding and babies from breastfeeding. As Arlene mentioned, most mothers in Georgia initiate breastfeeding. 70% or so of mothers start out breastfeeding, but that can drop off very quickly at the times that mothers are returning to work. And most surveys of new mothers that are asking about why they didn't meet their own breastfeeding goals state returning to work as one of the major obstacles. So that's one of our objectives today, is to try to start paving the pathway a little bit as best we can to support mothers when they're returning to work to continue to breastfeed. So they have 10 steps to the Breastfeeding Friendly Child Care Center, and I've outlined them quickly here. One I've alluded to is having a written policy that reflects your commitment to promoting and supporting breastfeeding, especially exclusive breastfeeding, that is shared, and that can be published, it can be posted, it should be clearly communicated. Step 2 is training and evaluating all your staff in skills to support and promote optimal infant and young child feeding. And that can be included in annual training and staff evaluations. Number 3 is to inform women and families about the importance of breastfeeding. They have on the CGBI website promotional posters and things like that you can post to make it really clear that your center is and promotes breastfeeding. So having those educational materials available and distributed actively are important. Providing learning and play opportunities that normalize breastfeeding for children. This is a little outside the box, but I thought it was really important because how we as a culture communicate to young children about how babies are fed makes a big difference in how our society as a whole and the institutions in our society can promote breastfeeding. And they have resources on their website in terms of having books in your classrooms that normalize breastfeeding, There's some really cute, even down to toddler board books about animals feeding their babies and things like that can really make this a really easy step to integrate. Making sure that that there's dolls and baby dolls of all different kinds available, mother and baby or family type animal families and things like that can be make that a really easy way to integrate. Step 5, ensure that all breastfeeding families that your center serves are able to properly store and label their milk for the child care center, and we've talked about some steps there, and making sure that that's clearly communicated. Number 6 is providing a breastfeeding friendly environment, and we've talked about some of the opportunities there in terms of having a place for mothers to come and breastfeed on their lunch break, or to breastfeed right when they bring their baby if they're traveling a long distance to get to the child care center because they chose one close to their work. Then the baby can be ready to eat again by the time they get to the child care center to drop them off. So not having to sit in her car, but feeling welcomed to breastfeed in the child care center can really make a big difference in the number of times she has to pump during the day to keep up her milk supply as well. Support your breastfeeding employees. So many childcare workers are employing young women of childbearing age, and I've gotten many calls over the years from someone who works in a childcare facility and does not feel supported in continuing to breastfeed their own baby or to pump for their own child. So making sure that your policies support not only mothers of the babies you're caring for, but your employees as well. Number 8, ensuring that each infant has a feeding plan that supports best feeding practices. So sometimes that can be a challenge because we all know it's more efficient to feed every baby on the schedule at the same time and for all babies to be sleeping at the same time. But best feeding practices indicate that cue feeding and that babies will have a variety in the terms of how much volume they're taking, what type of bottle they prefer. All of that is important, and that's something that you and the baby's family are agreeing on, and that it's in writing and updated regularly. Step 9, contact and coordinate with community breastfeeding resources and actively refer mothers and families to these. And we've made that super easy here in Georgia. Arlene and I are on the board of the Georgia Breastfeeding Coalition, and zipmilk.org is a website that we have worked hard to make available to professionals and families in Georgia. And it's an easy referral to breastfeeding help in any given mother's area, no matter where you are in the state. Now, of course, there sadly are some areas that are better resourced than others, but I would encourage you all to go to zipmilk.org and put in the zip code of where you are or one in a nearby town to see what kind of breastfeeding support is listed in your neighborhood. And that makes giving out the Zip Milk information to new parents is a great way of complying with step number 9. And then number 10 is to train all staff annually on the protection, promotion, and support of breastfeeding. And that's really not very hard to integrate some of these resources into your annual staff training. There's so many good resources. You're going to get a follow-up with specific resources on how to make sure that the training that you're offering or requiring of your staff is up to date and is in line with public health goals around promoting, protecting, and supporting breastfeeding. So I think, Micah, we are in a position to answer some questions. We have some time here if there's questions from the group.
Okay, great. Let's see. If you have any questions, you can either put your questions in the box and I'll read them, or you can raise your hand. There's an option for you to raise your hand, and it will notify me, and I will unmute you so you can ask your question. Let's see.
While we're waiting for some questions, to wrap up the Carolina Global Breastfeeding Institute resources on this, they have a wonderful self-assessment to start with where you can rate your institution, your child care center or your home-based center on where you are on each of those steps, and then help you make a sample plan to address each of those steps a little better to try to optimize the support that you're offering.
Let's see. Okay, Carol. Carol, I have you unmuted. Carol Hendricks, you have a question?
Hi, Carol.
Hey, Carol.
I feel like I'm on a radio show, a talk radio show. Go ahead, Carol.
You can hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
No, I didn't have a question. I think when you asked me to ask if we could hear anything, I just put in there that I could nothing. So I didn't have a question. I was raising my hand to tell you that we couldn't hear Claire.
Okay, all right. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
Thank
you for being an active listener.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, let's see if we have any others. And again, you can put them in the box or raise your hand. Let's see, Jan. I see your hand. Jan, you're unmuted. Jan,
go ahead,
Brown.
Jan.
No question? Maybe that was from earlier. All right, let's see. I see one more. I think it's sorry, we've got a lot of people on this call or this webinar. Let's see, Jennifer. Let me find you here. Jennifer Laster. Did you have a question, Jennifer? You're unmuted.
Okay, yes. Where do we find the assessments that we can do to see if our breast rooms are friendly for our parents? Where do we do that to do a self-assessment? Where do we find that?
Yeah, so it's on the website for the Carolina Global Breastfeeding Institute, and we will send out a link.
Okay, perfect. Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
Yeah, the self-assessment is a great tool because I think a lot of people say, oh, we're doing X, Y, and Z, so we've checked off that we're breastfeeding friendly. And I thought the questions were really well worded because it's on a continuum. Like, even if you have a written policy, is your written policy published? Is it given to new parents? Is it posted in your child care center? Is it included in your evaluation that you do annually with your employees? Things like that. So each step, it has kind of a continuum to see where you are, whether you're not addressing that step at all, or whether you're doing like A+ job on that step. So then it always gives you areas of opportunity that you could be working on. And then it helps you make a plan, maybe not to address every step right now this month, but to make a plan of what direction you want to be headed as an institution or as a home-based care provider. If there aren't other questions, Micah, I know Arlene and I know kind of some common questions that come up that we'd be happy to share if there aren't any other questions from the audience.
I do have one more. Someone typed in a question.
Okay.
Is there a website to go back over these slides? I will send these slides out along with those links, so we have that. And then another question is the business case for employers available to daycares? How do they qualify for an in-house breast pump for their center and get supplies to use, such as kits and things?
That's a good question. Actually, I'm trying to think where.
Yeah. Well, the business case for breastfeeding is a specific program that's available on the Office of Women's Health website, and we can include that in the references that we send out. In the past, there have been some grant-funded programs to provide breast pumps, and we can check on the status of those. Some businesses have qualified to have a breast pump in their business if it's going to be used frequently by a lot of people to have a hospital-grade breast pump. But now that so many mothers are able to be eligible for a breast pump through their insurance or through WIC or through even the Medicaid CMOs here in Georgia, many of them will provide a breast pump to women who are intending to go back to work. So breast pump access has increased a lot. And if a mother is mainly breastfeeding and just pumping when she's at work, then a purchase-grade breast pump is usually sufficient. A double electric pump that's provided to them. But we can look into what sort of options are available for that and send them out with the resources. And we'll put a link to the business case for breastfeeding.
We also had in the past a joint venture with the Georgia SHAPE program where they donated some electric pumps, and we actually used them in businesses around Georgia that were helping moms that are coming back to work. So like Claire said, if you'd contact one of us, we can still see if any of those are available. There were not very many, but there could be a couple out there. If you felt like that your child care center could really use their own pump, we could look into that for you.
And then we had another question that said, interested in in children's books that normalize breastfeeding. Where did you say those suggestions were?
Yeah, that'll be in the resources for the CGBI on the 10 steps.
Okay, and then
but we can make a specific link in the resources if someone wants to go straight to that, because that is really fun. There's several lists. If you just Google it, you'll come up with lists as well. Breastfeeding children's books or something to that nature, you'll find some lists from the Leche League and some other breastfeeding promotion groups. But I'm fairly certain that the CGBI has a list in their resources, and we'll make sure that that's obvious.
I like their posters too, and they're actually free to download. So that's great if you want to show that your child care center is breastfeeding friendly. It's great to have a few posters around
that are culturally appropriate.
Yes.
And there's another question: is there a place parents can go to see if their child care facility is breastfeeding friendly?
I think the best thing to do is go and interview and discuss. If you're choosing a child care near your home first, go a couple and get your friends' recommendations, especially if you have friends that have been breastfeeding. That really helps. And just go visit, I think, and communicate with them what you want to do when you go back to work and if you want to breastfeed and see how they react. I think that's the best thing to do. Just like choosing a good pediatrician, I think.
For sure. And asking other parents, say, can you connect me with other parents whose babies are in your care as a reference, and asking, because some child care centers may publish guidelines or policies but then not follow them. So knowing like what another parent's lived experience has been in terms of whether they felt like the child care center or home-based center was a good partner in developing a feeding plan that was kept up to date for their child and that their milk was handled appropriately and those sorts of things. These 10 steps are a good place for parents to start with too. Like when they're doing an interview, like tell me about the room that you have here. Is the room available? Is it comfortable? Can I see it? Are parents encouraged to use it? Those sorts of questions. So the 10 steps to a breastfeeding friendly child care center are useful for the child care centers, but also for parents.
Any other questions?
That's all that I see right now.
Well, our contact information will be in your resources as well if anyone wants to contact Arlene or I directly with questions that arise later.
I will say, working in lactation for as long as I have, I want to say kudos to the child care centers in Georgia. I feel like y'all have made big strides with being supportive of moms, and I know this personally, like I said, having now almost 6 grandchildren, and most of those in daycare, and then just working with moms every day and about how things have changed over the years from what they were 25 years ago when moms would call me crying that they threw their breast milk out and, just different things. So I think y'all are doing a great job, and I'm hoping this talk will help you get more resources to even make your child care center even better.
Awesome.
Here.
Oh, so much. It's a great presentation, and thank you to everyone that joined. I just wanted to plug before we go. Again, I will send, with the resources and the slides, I will send a link to the evaluation. Please complete the evaluation, and there on the evaluation it will ask if you are in need of certs, and if that's the case, then you will also be sent a link for the post-test so that you can get your certificate for that. And if you want to sign up for additional webinars, please go to our website and do that, or we can add you to the list. And wanted to also let everyone know about our annual meeting and conference this October 22nd through the 23rd. And we will have a number of continuing education credits available for that, and about over 15 maternal and child health topics for that. So we hope you all will join us, and we're co-hosting with the Center for Black Women's Wellness. So thank you again to our presenters and to everyone that joined. You have a great afternoon.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Micah.
Bye.